The aroma of freshly baked donuts lingered in the warm, early morning air of Bakersfield, California. Yet inside the small shop nestled between a laundromat and an electronics store, Jim Lee Chang showed no signs of joy, unlike the sweet scent wafting from his oven. Jim, now 58 years old, was used to waking up at 4 a.m. to prepare for a new workday. His calloused hands gently kneaded dough, shaped it, and baked the donuts, hoping that today more customers would visit. However, business had not been looking promising lately. His bakery had once been a lively spot, where the chatter and laughter of customers blended with the aroma of freshly baked goods, creating a warm and unique atmosphere. Linda, his beloved wife, had been the heart of the small kitchen in the back. Her skillful hands created exquisitely decorated cakes and irresistible batches of cookies that kept customers coming back. But now the laughter had faded. For the past 6 months, Linda had been battling a rare and severe illness, and her condition was worsening. Medical bills were piling up, and Jim struggled to keep the bakery running on his own. Each day felt like a new challenge. Regular customers still stopped by, but their numbers were not enough to sustain the bakery. They purchased just enough to help Jim cover the utility bills, but far from enough to pay for Linda's treatment and the mortgage on their small home. Every evening after returning home, Jim would sit by Linda's bedside, trying to hide his worries and exhaustion. He told her cheerful stories about the bakery and their loyal customers, but deep down, he knew things were only getting worse. On a Thursday morning, the gray sky mirrored Jim's somber mood. The display case was only half filled with donuts, glazed, chocolate-covered, and jam-filled, neatly arranged as if waiting for someone to notice them. Jim leaned against the counter, wiping his flour-dusted hands on his apron, his gaze drifting out the window. The main street was eerily quiet, as though time had come to a standstill in this corner of town. Just then, he noticed the figure of a young man walking toward the bakery. The man wore a simple black hoodie and jeans, his steps unhurried but purposeful. Jim squinted as the stranger pushed open the door, the soft chime of the bell announcing his arrival. "Good morning," Jim greeted, attempting to mask his weariness with a polite smile. The customer nodded in return, a gentle gesture, yet there was something distinctly special about him. His stance exuded confidence, but his eyes carried a rare softness, unlike the typical patrons Jim was accustomed to. The young man slowly approached the counter, his gaze fixed on the donuts displayed in the glass case. Over the years, Jim had encountered all sorts of customers, but there was something unique about this one. He couldn't quite pinpoint it, but in his current situation, he couldn't afford to lose any potential customer. "Do you have a favorite donut?" Jim asked, breaking the silence. His voice carried a hint of warmth, an attempt to lighten the heavy air between them. The young man looked up, his eyes meeting Jim's. In that brief moment, there was a profound sincerity in his gaze. "I'm not sure," he replied softly, his voice calm and measured. "Do you have any recommendations?" Jim scratched his chin, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Well, the jam-filled donuts are pretty popular. A lot of people say they remind them of their childhood. But if you're into something classic, you can never go wrong with a glazed donut." The customer nodded thoughtfully, his attention returning to the display case. "Have you been here long?" he asked, catching Jim off guard. Most customers didn't care about the history of the humble little bakery. They simply came to grab their coffee and snacks. But something about the young man's tone compelled Jim to answer honestly. "Yeah, nearly 30 years now," Jim said, his eyes scanning the worn shelves and the faded wallpaper. "My wife and I started this place together. She used to handle all the cake decorations." His voice faltered slightly, and he busied himself rearranging napkins on the counter to hide the emotion welling up. The customer noticed but refrained from prying further. Instead of pushing for more, the young man leaned against the counter, tilting his head slightly. "She doesn't work here anymore?" he asked gently. Jim hesitated. He wasn't one to share personal matters with strangers, but something about this customer, perhaps his calm demeanor or the genuine concern in his eyes, made Jim feel more at ease. "She's sick," Jim admitted after a pause, his voice lowering as though speaking too loudly would make the reality even harder to bear. "Been unwell for a while now. Lately, I've been managing the shop on my own. It keeps me busy, you know." The young man nodded again. this time with a softer expression. I'm really sorry to hear that. It must be tough. Jim shrugged, forcing a faint, strained smile. You do what you have to do. But Jim's eyes couldn't hide the weight he was carrying. For a few seconds, the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter was the only sound breaking the silence. The young man seemed lost in thought, his gaze returning to the glass display case of donuts. Then, as if making an important decision, he straightened up. I'll take everything, he said, his voice firm. Jim blinked in surprise. Take what? All of the donuts, the man replied, gesturing toward the display. Everything you've got. Jim's mouth opened slightly in astonishment. You want to buy all the donuts? That's more than 5 dozen. The young man smiled faintly and pulled out a sleek black leather wallet. That's fine. Please pack them up for me. Jim hesitated. In his years of running the bakery, he'd encountered plenty of pranksters and time wasters, and this offer sounded too good to be true. Are you serious? He asked, narrowing his eyes slightly in skepticism. The man met his gaze without flinching. Absolutely serious. Jim didn't ask any more questions. Customers like this didn't come around often, and he didn't want to risk scaring him off. Yet deep down, Jim couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the donuts. His hands moved automatically as he grabbed boxes and began packing. Glazed donuts, chocolate-covered ones, powdered sugar donuts, and jam-filled delights. Each donut was carefully placed in the boxes, but his mind raced with questions. Who was this man? And why would he want to buy every single donut in the shop? Are you preparing for a party? Jim asked, masking his curiosity with small talk. The young man chuckled softly and shook his head. No party. I just have my reasons. Jim wanted to press further, but something in the man's tone stopped him. There was a calmness, almost a quiet confidence that made Jim trust him, even if he didn't fully understand. When the last donut was packed, Jim stacked the boxes on the counter. That'll be $235, he said, half expecting the customer to back out. Without a moment's hesitation, the young man handed over his credit card. Jim glanced at the embossed name on the card and froze. Barron Trump. The realization hit him like a jolt, leaving him momentarily stunned. He had seen the name before, heard it on the news, though he had never paid much attention. Politics and headlines weren't his world. Baking and surviving were his priorities. Swallowing his surprise, Jim swiped the card and handed it back. Thank you, he said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in his head. As the young man prepared to leave with the boxes, Jim found himself blurting out, Why did you buy everything? Barron paused, his hand on the door, and turned back with a small, enigmatic smile. Sometimes kindness is the best gift, he said softly before stepping out, leaving Jim standing there, still trying to process what had just happened. However, Jim couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. This wasn't just any customer. Barron noticed the flicker of surprise in Jim's eyes, but didn't comment. Instead, as Jim swiped the card and handed back the receipt, Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. This is for you, Barron said, sliding the envelope across the counter. Jim stared at it, confused. What's this? Open it later, Barron replied, his expression unreadable. And take the day off. Spend time with your wife. Jim blinked, completely bewildered. I can't just close the shop. I need the money, the bills. You've worked hard enough, Barron interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. Trust me, everything will be fine. Before Jim could protest further, Barron picked up the boxes of donuts, handling them with surprising ease despite their weight, and headed for the door. The doorbell jingled softly as Barron left, leaving Jim standing there, the envelope still in his hand. For a moment, Jim couldn't move. The surreal nature of what had just happened was too much to process. But eventually, curiosity got the better of him, and he tore open the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note and a stack of cash. The letter read, Dear Jim, your story touched me more deeply than I can express. You remind me of what truly matters in life: family, love, and resilience. Please accept this gift and use it for whatever you need, whether it's for your wife's care or simply to find some peace of mind. You deserve a break. Wishing you all the best, Barron. Jim's hands trembled as he counted the money. $10,000. He sank onto the nearest stool, his breath catching in his throat. He wasn't a man prone to tears, but in that moment, the weight of his struggles and the kindness of a stranger overwhelmed him, and he couldn't hold back his emotions. Jim sat there for a long time, the letter clutched tightly in his hands, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Deep down, he knew this wasn't just luck. It was something much bigger. Jim didn't close the shop immediately. He needed time to process everything, the envelope, the letter, the money. It all felt like a dream he might wake from at any moment. But as he looked around his little bakery, he realized something extraordinary had truly happened. And it wasn't just about the money. Barron's words echoed in his mind. Take the day off. Spend time with your wife. By noon, Jim had made his decision. He hung the closed sign on the door. For the first time in years, he was closing early for a reason that wasn't an emergency. Jim felt a sense of calm wash over him as he locked up the shop. He was heading home, not out of obligation, but because he finally had the chance to do what truly mattered. With a box of Linda's favorite donuts in hand, Jim drove home, feeling the weight in his chest lighten for the first time in months. When he walked in, Linda was resting in her favorite armchair by the window. The soft afternoon sunlight bathed her slender frame, and her tired eyes lit up at the sight of him. "Jim, why are you home so early?" she asked, her voice as soft as a whisper. He knelt beside her, placing the box of donuts on the table. "You won't believe what happened today," he said, taking her hand in his. "A customer came into the bakery and bought every single donut. Then he left us a gift, enough to cover your treatment for the next several months." Tears welled up in Linda's eyes as she squeezed his hand. "Who would do such a thing?" she asked. Jim hesitated, unsure if she would believe it. "Baron Trump," he finally said. Linda's mouth fell open, and for a moment they simply stared at each other, letting the weight of those words sink in. But the impact of Barron's kindness didn't stop there. The next morning, when Jim reopened the bakery, he wasn't sure what to expect. He hadn't told anyone about what had happened, yet somehow the news had spread. A local journalist who happened to be in the shop when Barron visited had shared the story on social media. When Jim unlocked the door, a line of people was already stretched down the street. "I heard what that young man did for you," a woman said as she ordered 2 dozen donuts. "It reminded me how important it is to support the people who make this city what it is." Others echoed her sentiment, and for the first time in years, the cash register at Jim's bakery rang nonstop. Customers came not only to buy donuts, but also to share words of encouragement and support. By the end of the weekend, Jim had sold nearly every donut in the shop. Local businesses reached out to collaborate, and even a regional TV station stopped by to interview him. The bakery, once struggling to stay afloat, had become a symbol of hope and community spirit. But as the days passed, Jim realized that Barron's true gift wasn't just the money. It was a reminder that kindness, no matter how small or unexpected, could spark extraordinary change. Every day, customers walked through the bakery doors, sharing stories of how Barron Trump's actions had inspired them. Some donated to local charities, others volunteered their time, and a few even started campaigns to spread love and kindness within their own neighborhoods. Linda's health also began to improve. While she still required care and monitoring, the treatments were working. She grew stronger, laughed more, and even started visiting the bakery to decorate cookies, a joy she hadn't been able to experience in years. On a quiet Tuesday morning, Jim sat at one of the bakery's tables with a cup of coffee in hand. Across from him, Linda smiled, her cheeks rosy for the first time in months. Though her recovery was ongoing, there was a renewed light in her eyes, and for Jim, that was the greatest gift of all. The bakery's journey, shaped by struggle, kindness, and resilience, had become a testament to the power of community and the profound impact one act of generosity could have on countless lives. "You know," Linda said, her warm voice filled with gratitude, "what that young man did for us. It reminds me that this world isn't as cold as it sometimes seems." Jim nodded, his eyes drifting to Barron's framed letter hanging near the cash register. Beneath it was a small plaque engraved with the words, "Kindness doesn't just change a moment, it changes a life." Later that day, as Jim was getting ready to close the bakery, he noticed a young boy hesitating outside the door. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old, his clothes slightly worn, his face a mix of nervousness and curiosity. "Hey there, kid," Jim called out, crouching down to meet the boy's eyes. "Are you hungry?" The boy nodded timidly. Jim walked to the display case, grabbed a chocolate donut, and handed it to him with a smile. "This is for you. Take care of yourself, okay?" The boy's face lit up with a radiant smile as he ran off, clutching the donut as if it were a treasure. Jim stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the boy disappear down the street. As he turned back inside to close up the shop, Jim couldn't help but smile. Kindness had entered his bakery that day with Barron Trump, not just to help him, but to remind him of who he truly was and the power of giving, even in the smallest of ways. Life would always come with its challenges, but now Jim knew that even in the darkest times, there was always a light waiting to be shared, and it was up to each of us to carry it forward. The story of Jim, Linda, and Barron Trump is not just a tale of simple kindness. It is a testament to how a single act can create profound change in someone's life. It reminds us that in this turbulent world, humanity remains our most precious treasure. Every day we have the chance to be a Barron Trump in someone's life, not necessarily through money, but through care, compassion, and small acts of kindness. How has this story touched your heart? Have you ever experienced or witnessed moments of kindness like this? Share your story in the comments below. Questions for reflection. What do you think about Barron Trump's actions? How can we spread kindness in our communities? What acts of kindness do you plan to carry out in the near future? If this story has inspired you, consider sharing it with your friends and family, liking and subscribing to the channel for more meaningful stories, starting your own chain of kindness. Remember, kindness doesn't have to be grand, it just needs to be sincere.